Hello everyone and welcome back my dear students to the offline video series of Biology of class 6. So as we have completed our syllabus, today from this video onwards we are going to start with the revision. So today in this video we are going to revise lesson number 5, Respiratory System in Human Beings. So before we start with the revision, I will tell you the main points which we are going to revise in this lesson. In this lesson, we are going to revise what do you mean by respiration, which are the different organs involved in the process of respiration, what do you mean by breathing, and what is the basic difference between respiration and breathing, and the last point, some of the common respiratory diseases through which people suffer in their day-to-day life. So let us start with the revision. So the first point, what do you mean by respiration? Respiration is the process in which the glucose is oxidized into simpler form and energy molecules are released. These energy molecules are utilized by all the body cells, tissues, organs and different body parts for performing various activities in our day-to-day life. We know that we perform many different types of activities throughout the day, right from morning up to the night when we go to the bed. For example, playing, running, walking, sleeping, studying, eating, etc. All these activities requires energy. And this energy we get from the oxidization of glucose. Glucose is the result of food which is being digested into the stomach with the process of digestion. There are two types of respirations in organisms based on the utilization or use of oxygen. The respiration is divided into two main types. First one is the aerobic respiration and second one is the anaerobic respiration. In aerobic respiration, oxygen is utilized by the organisms. In anaerobic respiration, no oxygen is utilized by the organisms for breathing. Now we are going to start with the next topic. Some common respiratory organs of respiratory system in human beings. So, the organs which are involved in human respiratory system are nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, lungs, etc. So, first of all, let us start with the nose. Nose is the first organ which is involved in human respiratory system. It has two openings and that openings are known as nostrils. Each nostril is associated further with a nasal chamber. The inner lining of nasal chamber consists of a mucus substance which is quite sticky and fluid by nature. The main function of this mucus layer inside the nasal chamber is to prevent the entry of unnecessary germs, microorganisms and dust particles. Only fresh air enters through the nasal chamber and whatever foreign particles which enter with the air are left behind. Apart from that, nose has some special cells which help us to sense the smell of all the things in our surrounding. For example, food, flowers, etc. After nose, the next organ is pharynx. Pharynx is the passage which is present next below the nasal chamber. Pharynx is considered as the common path of food pipe and windpipe. Further, it divides and separates food pipe and windpipe into two different passages. After pharynx, the next organ is larynx. At the entry point of trachea, there is a voice box, and that voice box is known as larynx. This larynx consists of two ligamentous folds from inside. When this ligamentous folds vibrates with each other, sound is being produced. The front opening of trachea has a muscular flap-like structure, which is known as epiglottis. This epiglottis closes the opening of windpipe when the food is swallowed. Incomplete closure of this epiglottis can lead to coughing. That is why one should always avoid eating fast or speaking while eating. After larynx, the next organ which is involved in respiratory system is trachea. Trachea or windpipe is the passage which comes from the larynx and it passes from the throat portion up to the neck. Trachea is a short distance passage in the neck portion, and further it divides into two main branches. These branches are known as bronchi. These bronchi opens into the lungs. Left bronchi is associated with the left lung and right bronchi is associated with the right lung. Further, each bronchi is again subdivided into some sub-branches. These sub-branches are known as bronchioles. At the end of each bronchiole, microscopic air sacs are present and they are known as alveoli. The walls of alveoli are highly permeable, very thick and completely muscular and elastic by nature, so that it is easy for them to exchange the gases with the blood which is present in the lungs. The next organ which we are going to study is lungs. Lungs are a pair of pink color spongy organs which are found in the chest portion. They are protected by the rib cage. The left lung is slightly smaller and it has two lobes, while right lung is slightly somewhat bigger and it has three lobes. These lungs rest on an organ known as diaphragm. Diaphragm divides internally the body cavity into two different parts. The upper part is known as thoracic cavity and the lower part is known as abdominal cavity. The outer part of lungs is having a protective membrane. This membrane consists of inner and outer pleura. There is a liquid present between this inner and outer pleura which acts as a shock absorber. The next topic which we are going to study is phases of respiration. There are three main phases of respiration. First one is the breathing, second is the gaseous transport, and third one is the cellular respiration. So let us start with the breathing. Breathing is the process which is involved in two steps. First one is the inhalation and second one is the exhalation. In case of inhalation, air is taken in and along with air O2 is also taken in. In case of exhalation, CO2 along with the air is given out through the same passage. So, one inhalation and one exhalation combines together to. The next phase of respiration is gaseous transport. In this phase, we are going to study about how the gaseous exchange takes place. So, when we breathe in air, that air along with the oxygen goes and stores into the alveoli in the lungs. The deoxygenated blood comes into the lungs along with the CO2, and the gaseous exchange between alveoli and blood in lungs takes place. Blood is being purified into the lungs, and that oxygenated blood is transported to all the body parts, while the CO2 which is present in the alveolar sacs in the lungs is given out through the same passage. The next phase of respiration is cellular respiration. In this phase, breakdown of glucose is done with the help of oxygen molecules in the body, and energy is being generated. This energy is utilized by various cells, tissues, organs and body parts to perform day-to-day activities, and the remaining energy is stored into the cell for future use. Now we are going to study about the difference between inhalation and exhalation.
In case of inhalation, ribs moves in upward and outward. In case of exhalation, it moves downward and inward. Diaphragm is pushed downward and flattens in case of inhalation, while diaphragm moves upward and becomes dome shape. Volume of chest cavity increases while inhaling the air, and volume of chest cavity decreases while exhaling the air. In case of inhalation, lungs expand and air pressure becomes low. In case of exhalation, the size of lungs reduces and air pressure becomes high. Atmospheric pressure in inhalation rushes higher into the lungs, while in case of exhalation, it rushes very lower in the lungs portion.
Here we are going to study about an fact: why do we sneeze in our day-to-day life? Now we are going to study about the difference between breathing and respiration.
Breathing is a physical process, while respiration is a biochemical process. In breathing, air containing oxygen is taken in into the lungs and CO2 is given out. In case of respiration, that oxygen is oxidized and energy is released. In case of breathing, lungs are involved, and in case of respiration, it occurs only in all living cells of the body.
The respiratory system's main functions include transporting air into and out of the lungs, protecting the body against harmful particles that are inhaled, and its most important function, the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So it's basically about breathing. Now let's take a look at a diagram and we'll go through the respiratory system's main components. Starting here with the nose and nasal cavity, the mouth or oral cavity. The pharynx is here, and it is what we consider the throat. The pharynx is considered part of the digestive system as well as the respiratory system, and it connects the respiratory openings to the larynx and esophagus. The esophagus is not part of the respiratory system, and I'll get to why I put it in the diagram in a minute. Next we have the larynx, which is also called the voice box because the vocal cords are located here. The trachea, also called the windpipe, is here, and it connects to the bronchi, which merge into smaller tubes called bronchioles. And the bronchioles connect to tiny air sacs called alveoli. And then down here is the diaphragm. Now let's go through a very basic look at what happens during the breathing process. So air is breathed in through the nose or mouth. When it enters through the nose, it gets spread out by these shelf-like things here called conchi. The conchi help humidify the air and trap some inhaled particles. They also warm the air. The air next passes through the pharynx and enters the trachea. One note here. This little flap-like structure is called the epiglottis, and it has an important function. During breathing, it is pointed upward, allowing airflow into the trachea. However, during swallowing, it folds down to prevent food from going into the trachea, directing the food into the esophagus. If food does enter the trachea, the gag reflex is induced to protect the respiratory system. The epiglottis here, this little thing, shows you how amazing the human body is. Anyways, back to airflow. So air continues down the trachea and enters the bronchi. From there it enters into smaller bronchioles and finally into the alveoli, which are surrounded by a network of capillaries. And this, folks, is where the magic happens. Oxygen enters the alveolar sac, and the gas exchange occurs. Capillaries give up their waste carbon dioxide and pick up oxygen. Carbon dioxide is then exhaled through the air passage the oxygen was inhaled through, and the oxygen picked up by the blood returns to the heart.